Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Healthy Hustle podcast show. I'm your host, Jonathan, and I am glad you're here. On this show, I talk with industry-leading experts about connecting with others, impacting your niche, and striving to live the best life possible. It's all about sparking meaningful conversations around business ownership and entrepreneurship. The Heart Healthy Hustle Show is about finding connection with proactive peers and navigating a healthy work life with full autonomy. So whether you're driving to or from work right now, exercising, eating, or just relaxing, come hang out and get ready to enjoy another inspiring episode of the Heart Healthy Hustle Show. Welcome back to another episode of the Heart Healthy Hustle Show. I'm your host, Jonathan. Today, we have a very special guest, Mr. Randy Pennington. Randy is a business performance veteran. He's an award-winning author of Make Change Work, Results Rule, and On My Honor, I Will. Randy's an expert in helping organizations deliver positive results in a world of accelerating change. So to list a few of his professional accomplishments, Randy is the creator of integrity-driven leadership, as well as the creator of positive performance management. To name a few of his clients, there's Texas A&M University, Hyatt Hotels and Resorts, Sprint PCS, Brinks Home Security, Progressive Insurance, State Farm Insurance, and many others. He is also inducted into the Speaker Hall of Fame as a CPAE by the National Speakers Association. Randy, welcome to the show. It's a real privilege to speak with you today.
Oh, my pleasure, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and dive right into it. What's a favorite success quote or saying that you live by on your day-to-day life, and what does it mean to you?
Favorite best quote to live by: better to ask for forgiveness than permission. That's the one that I always live by, and it got me in a little trouble when I was working inside of organizations, because not every manager appreciates that, I found out.
Yeah, definitely. Explain to my audience how you transitioned from a younger individual in your early 20s, struggling to find your purpose, to now a strong, structured man of vision.
Sure. Jonathan, I didn't just come out of an organization. I came out of a bureaucratic organization. I worked in state government for 9 years. When I finished my undergraduate degree, I needed a job while I was going to graduate school. So I took a job playing volleyball with schizophrenics in State Psychiatric Hospital. And then after 2 years, I finished. What's that?
Volleyball, that sounds intense.
Yeah, it was intense. By the way, you're playing volleyball with schizophrenics. One of the most difficult concepts is that of rotation.
Oh, no.
So they ended up promoting me, moved me to HR. Then after about 18 months in there, they gave me an opportunity to go down and to move down to Waco, Texas. And I worked on the senior leadership team for a startup that opened a facility, a hospital for children and adolescents from the ground up. So that was really my first taste, even though I had an entrepreneurial bent. Before then, again, I always was the guy who asked for forgiveness rather than permission. When we got to that startup, it was very much making it up on the fly. So that gave me a chance to start thinking about, how do I structure something from the ground up? And I was very fortunate to work with two other guys on the leadership team who also had a similar mindset. And so we started there. But then I got recruited away from that after about 5 years into a very small consulting firm. And again, we were very entrepreneurial because we were small and scrappy and competing against a lot of the big guys in the marketplace. Became a partner in that firm and chief financial officer. And then after about 5 years there, I left and started my own. And the reason that I started my own, that I left out and sort of created my own business, was because I became frustrated. And I think that's what a lot of entrepreneurs do. They become frustrated by what they perceive as constraints, real or imagined constraints. They begin to think, well, I could do this better. Like most entrepreneurs, I looked at what I was being billed at as a consultant and thought, I can make a lot more money at half, if I can bill at half the rates. And so like most entrepreneurs, I said, I can do it better. I can do it cheaper. I can add a higher level of service. So I started out on my own. And I think like a lot of us, we don't always know what we don't know. And that was a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is I didn't know what I didn't know. So I didn't know that I was making up new rules. The bad news is I didn't know what I didn't know, which means I made a ton of mistakes in those early days. You learn from those and then you move on.
Great. I'd love to touch on some of those mistakes later on and how you overcame those. But something very interesting that I pulled out of what you just said was you and a couple of like-minded partners started that consulting. Did you say 5 or 9 years?
I was there for 5 years. Now, they had already been in business. They brought me in, but I became a partner after a couple of years there as a consultant. I became a partner. There were basically 3 of us that had this business with partners, and we were a multi-million-dollar operation, but it was pretty small, tight group of folks, I think 16, 18 folks.
That's fantastic. When you guys were at that level, your competitors were, you mentioned, maybe a lot scarier than you guys were in terms of size and fortitude, so to speak. But what gave you guys the audacity to go and compete with them in terms of your mindset? Most people would look at that and say, oh, well, there's not really any way we can compete there. Let's go ahead and look over here. You guys went after that.
Yeah, we started with, we thought we had a better idea. We thought we had a better product. We thought we had a level of expertise that the big guys didn't have. And it turns out we did. I mean, we were at one point, our client list at that time was 8 of the Fortune 10. Wow. So we had a better idea about what we were doing, and we weren't locked into the structure of how we worked like our big competitors were. And then we were very fortunate. We had some strategic wins. The Harvard Business Review wrote an article or published an article by one of our partners. The Business Week magazine did a story on us. And then all of a sudden, we had some notoriety as these sort of young Turks out there. And that gave us a little push. And more important, it solidified that we had a different idea than what the larger competitors were doing.
So basically fired that feedback loop that caused you guys to realize, hey, we're onto something here. This really works. We really do have a better solution.
Yeah, and the feedback was our clients kept telling us. One of the things that we did, and for anyone in a service business, I think that this is critically important. If you're producing a hard product, a widget of whatever that looks like, if your product works. If you're producing a service, especially if you're in the professional services world, you don't know necessarily that your product or that your service that you're providing is delivering a tangible result. And so one of the things that I think set us apart very quickly is that we walked in from the outset saying, if you aren't willing to measure performance and measure results, then we might not be a fit for you.
I like that. I really like that. Yeah, because with a widget, you have those physical gears, so to speak, that you can actually look at. Hey, this works. We're selling it to you. Goodbye, next customer. But a service, yeah, that's huge.
Right. And so we knew, for example, that in one client, accidents were down by 30%. We knew in another client that employee turnover had been reduced by 48% in 2 years. We knew one of my clients had a 62% reduction in turnover rate in the first year after working with me. And that's something that we still focus on, that I still focus on today is, it's a professional service and we can't always guarantee that our clients are going to do everything that we ask them to do from a consulting standpoint. But if I can keep them focused on results and measuring those results, then I can continue to prove our value. All of a sudden if you can show that you have a 62% reduction in turnover in 1 year, the check that you're willing to write me is a lot easier to stomach at that point.
Right. That makes total sense. Going back to before you split off with those partners or into that venture and then became a partner, you had mentioned you were working in a state level job.
Right. I was an executive in a psychiatric hospital for children and adolescents. I was 26 years old when I got that job.
Gotcha. Would you touch on, you mentioned a quote, it's better to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. So would you touch on that and what it was like to finally release yourself in terms of allowing yourself to go pursue something that you had where you were, it was permissible to use full bandwidth and no one was going to tell you, hey, you're working too hard or they didn't like your idea, so to speak. Would you touch on that and what it was like in that transition period?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Jonathan. Interesting. The reason why I left that job in state government was because I was 26, so now I was approaching 30, we'd had a great run. We'd had amazing success. I interviewed for a job, a higher level executive job at a much larger location.
Right.
And the guy that would have been my boss, this would have been a significant promotion for me. The guy that would have been my boss called me up after the interview and said, long term, you are the best candidate for this job. I said, great. And he said, but if I hire you, you'll be supervising a guy that's been in his current job for 18 years.
Yeah.
And I can't do that to him to put a 20-something-year-old kid. He didn't say that word, but that was sort of the implication that I heard. And I can't put you over him. So, your time will come. And I knew right then, Jonathan, that it was time for me to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was the event. I mean, that event said, all right, I have reached a point where I am no longer recognized just for my contribution, that there are other things that go into the mix, and I can't control those other things. And I think all of us as entrepreneurs have a little bit of a desire to control things. And so I said, I can't control those other pieces. So I want to move. I want to start moving into things where I can have more control over my own destiny. So then I went to the small consulting firm. I had more control. When I became a partner, I was a minority partner. And, one of the things I learned pretty quickly is a minority partner in a privately held company has very few rights. There are some, but there are very few. And again, I was placed in a position where I couldn't control my own destiny. And so one of the things that I've always done that I think is I look back in my own career, from employee to more entrepreneurial partnership to a small firm to going out on my own, there's been that really strong desire to be able to control my own destiny. And when I found myself hitting that wall, where it became obvious that I could no longer control my own destiny just on my own performance, that's when I started looking to make the next move.
That's really powerful. There's something about true meritocracy where you know your capabilities as a professional. And when you don't see a just way of that, it's not being used. It's not justice. It's not true meritocracy. Once you hit that wall of, okay, it's not a meritocracy, it's just politics, and I'm not going to allow this to hold my life back. That's when you made that leap. Is that right?
Yeah. And so one of the things, and it's one of the most difficult things that I've learned in being an entrepreneur and in business for myself, at any given moment in any given day, you are exactly where you've earned the right to be.
Yep. And even if
good or bad.
Yes. And I don't mean to cut you off, but that excites me so much, because it's even if you are doing great, let's say, in a job where you are the majority of the time told what to do, how to act, what to do, and you're doing phenomenal, A+ bang up job. But even if you feel like the job is holding you back, that quote still applies.
Absolutely. Yeah. You are exactly where you've earned the right to be. And whether it's, positive results, I mean, I would love to tell you that I've stepped up to the plate every time that I've stepped up to the plate, I've at least had a base hit. No, I've had some strikeouts along the way. And, every time I have to go back and remind myself, I was responsible for that. Even if it was something maybe that I didn't see coming, I'm still responsible for knowing that. So,
yep.
I've looked at every single thing that I've done, the positives and the negatives, and I've had to learn to say to myself, it's my fault or it's my hard work that got me that result. And once I've accepted that, then that means I look at things differently than I would if I just had a job, so to speak.
Transitioning now into, you go out, you start your own business. How did you get into becoming a speaker, and what did that look like in your life? And that transition, was it easy? Did it come naturally, or did you really feel a calling to do that and to give back in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I can point to a couple of things, Jonathan, that led me into, sort of the role that I was today. One, when I was a partner in the consulting firm, I began to realize that speaking at conferences was a good way to market our services. And that if I went and did a presentation and 50 people gave me business cards that says, hey, I'd like to learn more about what you guys are doing, then out of that 50, maybe 2 of them would end up being business. But that was a good day because we were selling fairly high dollar consulting efforts. So I began to speak then. And then I began to realize that there was a whole group of people out there who weren't just using presentations to promote their product or service. There's a whole group of people out there that were getting paid for this. And when I watched a few of them quite frankly, some of them weren't that good. And so I began to think there is something to be said for that. So I added that piece of it to the mix. I realized very quickly that I wasn't always as good as I thought I was, but I kept working and learning and getting better at it over the years. And it's just like anything else. The more you work at it, the better you get at developing that skill. I began to realize then possibly I could do that. And then about 5 or 6 years into my own business, after I transitioned out, I began to think of my business differently. I still speak, but I don't think of myself or call myself a speaker, so to speak. I still consult, I still coach, but I don't call myself a consultant or a coach. I don't think of myself that way. I am a provider of ideas and solutions. And everything around that is a distribution system. So speaking is just another distribution system, along with my writing, along with my consulting or coaching. Everything that I do is really just a distribution system. I am in the helping people take ideas and turn them into action to deliver results business. And that's the business that I'm in.
Love it. So let's go ahead and touch on maybe the top 3 examples of that, a tangible example perhaps that the audience could learn from.
Yeah, it sort of varies at any given year. Right now, I'll give you some idea. I'll give you a few of the taste of my clients right now. I have a company in the oil field manufacturing business that I work with. I've been working with them now for about 15 months. They are quite frankly drinking from a fire hose. And one of the challenges they have is keeping up with the potential. Let me give you some numbers to put it into perspective. When I started working with these folks, they were doing about $45 million a year in revenue. Last year, 2017, they did about $85 million in revenue. This next year, they'll do 18. They'll probably do 100 to 125 million in revenue. Now, I would love to tell you that all of that is because of me. I will take credit for a portion of it, but after the last presidential election, life became a whole lot easier for people in the oil industry. You can like that or you can not like it. That's your decision, but their world became easier. But the big problem they have now is they can't keep up with orders. And so their big challenge right now, this is a very entrepreneurial company, is they have more business opportunity than they have capacity to deliver that. So there's physical capacity in buildings and machines, but most important, there's talent capacity. So when I talk to entrepreneurs today, they have a great example. I work with 2 guys I think you may have interviewed before, Larry Winget and Scott McCain. Yes,
sir. Both of them. It was great.
Yeah. And so Larry and Scott and I do a program together called the Ultimate Business Summit. You can find it at ultimatebusinesssummit.com. And we work with small businesses and entrepreneurs. And almost all of them tell us that they're just like that company I just mentioned. How do we find and attract and retain good people? That's a huge challenge for businesses today.
Yeah.
And probably one of the biggest that most entrepreneurs face, because what you want, what we all want is people who are just as committed to it as we are. But then we have to come back and balance that against the realization that for us, it's our life. Owning a business, being an entrepreneur, that's a lifestyle choice. For them, it's a pretty good job. And so finding that match with people and then building a culture in your business that attracts and retains those folks, that's one of the hardest things that I see entrepreneurs facing right now.
I would agree with that. I see that trend big time. Even in companies where you might have people who love to work there is still a relatively high turnover between 1 year and 3 years where people are, maybe they're not disloyal, but they are excited for the next thing. There's a lack of full committal to one type of company. But going back to another issue that you touched on with this company you just mentioned, really interesting is that I call it entrepreneurial surfing. That time where your business, this company is just exploding right now. How and what are some tactical methods that a business owner could utilize in that time? Because that's a hard thing to accept. Like once you actually allow that floodgate to come through your business, it's great. Business is booming. But at the same time, you're worried because you're like, oh, can we sustain this? Oh, we got to hire more people over here. That surfing, because in real surfing, you can fall, of course, and it's very volatile. Every wave is different and it's a very exhilarating, however, daunting experience. So what are some ways that an entrepreneur, you've helped people handle that in a more level-headed way?
The first question that you have to ask, if you believe this is a sustainable growth, I mean, there's two kinds of surges in a business. There's one that it's very much an opportunistic surge that you have a gut feeling is it's not going to last. And then the second is you realize this is a sustainable surge that, if we can gear up, we can ride this thing. This isn't just a big wave. This is a sea change, so to speak. And that's the first thing I try to help them understand is, if this is something that we think is a long-term issue, then there's a different type of solution. That means hiring more people. That means purchasing more facilities. They just applied for a rather significant line of credit because they're going to open 3 new buildings in the next year to help manage this growth because they've determined that it's something that's going to be there for a while. Now, if it's just a one big wave, that's the abnormal big wave within a sea of relatively small waves, then you deal with it a little differently. So I think the very tactical thing is, first off, you have to understand what the sea is that you're playing in. If it's just one big wave that we need to ride, we'll probably go out and rent help through vendors or contractors or other ways to find that don't require adding overhead. Then there's the next decision of, what other do you want to be in the business of managing vendors or do you want to be in the business of managing employees? There's not a right answer there. And a big part of what I do with folks like this, Jonathan, is help them understand alternatives and then pros and cons, which one's going to allow them to achieve the long-term success of their business, and then help them start. Once you know where you're going, once you've picked the lane that you're going to run in, then it becomes easier to map out those steps to get there.
That's very true. So you have to be very decisive.
That is true.
Okay. So that can be hard. That's for me, especially transitioning into the entrepreneurship. You very well could be dead wrong, but then if you're right, then you did the right thing either way because you got there faster by making that decision.
And some people are very decisive in an emotional way. It's like one of the folks that are in this little company, all the decisions are very intuitive. He knows exactly what needs to be done. And he sees it. And part of it's because he has some experience in the industry, but part of it is that's the way he decides. On the other hand, one of the other people on the senior leadership team is very cautious and wants to not just check the numbers, but will check them and double check them and triple check them to make sure that everything is there because he tries to minimize the risk of failure. Ultimately, I think in an entrepreneurial business, you need both of those voices at the table. Yes. You need somebody that will make you think about risks. But at the same time, if you have someone who is more risk averse, you need someone also that can bring that vision of what's possible in the future. So there really is a balancing act in the process of being decisive.
So Randy, on your website, you have things that you've done in your life. One of the things I found very interesting is that you listed a locker room attendant at a public swimming pool as your first job. It says his first job. What does that mean to you to list that, and why did you list that on your website?
One of the reasons is I had that job when I was 12. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I listed it is because it was at 12, I had a real job. Now, it was only a 20-hour-a-week job, but when I talk about that to people, it is part of my DNA. I grew up in a working class family. I took that job because on the very first day of summer when I was 12 years old, my father was sitting at the breakfast table and said, "Okay, you're 12. What are you going to do this summer?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to play Little League baseball and probably take swimming lessons and whatever." And he said, "But where are you going to work?" And I was like, "Yeah, but you don't understand." And he said, "No, I do understand, but none of those things happen until you know where you're going to work." As part of that, Jonathan, I learned at a very early age the value of working, and that became critical. I think it's one of the reasons why I listed that as my first job. It was one of those. It's one of those things to show that I learned at a very early age the value of work.
Yeah. It's inspirational because you look at this is where I started, this is where I am now, and all the steps along the way, all of the lily pads, so to speak, is what I call them. Different phases in life, different jobs and career opportunities.
That very first job, I parlayed that job into a better job. It's very much, as you say, there's the lily pad of, kind of jumping from the next one to the next one. I can go back and look at every single thing that I've done in my career, and I can point back to what I was doing before then was the step that prepared me to get there.
Yeah, that's so huge. And that's one thing I harp on, especially with my peers, is that you may be in this job right now, but treat it like it's everything, because that's preparing you for the next step. And not going in there with full energy and really giving it your all, even if you dislike it, it's not right. I think a big trait of successful individuals, they're always looking how to give more and how to elevate to the next position or opportunity, and always seeking that out, not thinking to themselves they're too good for any type of job. Personally, I've always looked at the job I'm in, and if it's a rough day, I think to myself, this isn't going to last forever. And honestly, that's very encouraging, because you have a light at the end of the tunnel, and maybe you look back 2 years and say, wow, that really didn't last long, and I'm glad I kept a good attitude because it made the time go faster and I learned a lot.
I agree with you there, Jonathan. I'm sort of more the belief that, you're as happy as you want to be in whatever job. It may be a tough job. I mean, when I was in college doing my undergraduate studies, I worked the afternoon shift, afternoons and evenings, in a machine shop that made drill bits for oil field drilling. I ran a furnace. I worked in shipping and receiving. It was a dirty job, but we had fun in that job. Everybody got along. Everyone worked hard. Everyone pulled their weight. I look back and say, I don't know that I'm any happier as a person now. I mean, I certainly have a better life now, but I don't know, at an existential level, if I'm a happier person than I was then. You went to work, you did your job, you look for the opportunities, you try to do good work, you learn everything that you can. And then realize that all of those things, if you keep your eyes open, become the setup for the next step in your life.
Yes, and it almost is a paradigm where if you don't look at it that way, you could get trapped there more time. So I want to ask you a question. I ask every guest this. If you had 60 seconds with your 25-year-old self, what would you tell him to do, and what would you tell him not to do?
Yeah, one of the things I tell my 5-year-old self to do is...
25-year-old self.
25-year-old self. I would say 5-year-old self, I would tell that. My 25-year-old self, I would say, think more strategically. And think about it. Think more strategically about where do you want to be at a very specific time in your life.
And why would you say that?
So, for example, I live in the Dallas, Texas area. When I was 25, I wasn't living in Dallas at the time, but had I thought strategically at the age of 25 about that, I would have bought a piece of property in a little bitty town because Dallas was going to grow that direction. And then I probably would have sold that little piece of property to Jerry Jones to build the Dallas Cowboys practice facility.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And so you say, well, how would you know that? Well, if you think more strategically, if you start looking at where's the future headed, that the chances are good this piece, Dallas as a city is going to grow because the population is going to grow. So you have to ask that question, put yourself in that world, 25 years later, what's it probably going to look like? And so if I were doing that right now today, I would be thinking about how's artificial intelligence going to affect what I do in my business? What's 5G technology when it happens? Because a multiplier step.
Yeah. And everything gets faster and faster and faster. Yeah.
But if you start thinking strategically about what's coming, from a strategic standpoint, I don't think any of us understand what technology is going to do for our future at the level that we probably should. I mean, there are a few people that are working in it that get it, but most of us aren't thinking that far out.
Yeah.
And so, at 25, I would say be thinking much more strategically. The other thing that I would tell my 25-year-old self is get really good at execution.
Yeah.
Learn the discipline of execution.
And not talking.
Doing.
Yes.
But it's how do you, what's that discipline of execution? Because when I see, entrepreneurs that really make it, I live in the Dallas area. I'm a season ticket holder for the Dallas Mavericks. Mark Cuban is our owner. When I look at what Mark has done a phenomenal amount in his life. One of the reasons why Mark has done it, it's not that Mark's any smarter than everybody else in the room. He's a really smart guy, but he's not necessarily the smartest guy in the room. But he just executes like crazy on ideas, and I think that's the mark of a truly great entrepreneur.
Being willing to fail and realizing it doesn't affect your self-worth or your identity in any way. It's just another venture to be attempted. So, Randy, I'm really enjoying this interview. When we go into the Heart Healthy Hustle round, I'm going to ask you a series of 3 questions. One of this applying to each word in the name of the show, which the first one is the area of your heart. So what is one of your favorite activities for strengthening your internal character?
Well, I think of heart in two ways. First off, I think of it the internal character side, and that's really valuing relationships.
Yeah.
And understanding the fragile nature of life and the importance of relationships in those. I think that it's easy to get lost in the activity, but at the same time, you have to realize that the old cliche is true, and it's a cliche because it is true at the end of people's lives. They look back on the quality of their relationships, not the quantity of their activities. But I also think of heart in a physical way because, when you read my bio, one of the things you'll find is I am past chairman of the board for the American Heart Association in Texas. And
Wonderful.
I spent a lot of years around cardiovascular disease. And one of the things I will tell you is exercise.
Yes. That was my next question is health. Yeah. How do you maintain your physical health?
I probably haven't missed more than 20 days of exercise, regular exercise, cardiovascular and or strength training. I haven't missed more than 20 days in the last 20 years.
And why? Because coming from someone like you who is a part of a medical
association, Heart Association raises money for cardiovascular disease and stroke research.
Okay, so you've seen wellness. You've seen the real life value and importance that needs to be placed on this. So would you touch on that? Because I think that you saying stuff on this will hold a lot of weight.
Sure. I mean, one of the things we know is that first off, we could reduce death and disability in this country by at least 25% with existing information and science. We need no new information or no new science to reduce death and disability in this country by at least 25%. Think about the economic toll of what it means to have people supported by the public dollar who have become disabled. There's a huge economic drain. There's a huge family drain. There's a huge emotional drain around that. There's a productivity drain in the country that comes from that. And so we could cut that by 25% at least if people simply did what we know how to do, which is what we eat, how we exercise, what numbers we need to control. You have to look at your blood pressure. You have to look at your cholesterol, good and bad, LDL and HDL. You have to look at triglycerides. You have to know what your key numbers are, and then you have to maintain them. And then there's the reality that, all the research right now that health does lead to happiness. If you look at people who are really unhealthy, I don't know that I've ever found someone who is truly unhealthy that I would look at and go, that person's happy. They just don't go together.
Yeah, it's like everybody has to sleep. You could be the Pope or you could be working at the gas station, but both of you have to go to sleep at some point.
Right. The things that you do to make yourself healthy. When I look at really successful entrepreneurs, Mark Cuban is a great example. Exercises every single day. There's a guy named Stan Richards. Stan founded a company years ago called the Richards Group. The Richards Group is the largest privately held marketing and advertising firm in the United States. Stan's in his 70s right now. He exercises every single day because he knows that it makes him more productive. It keeps his energy level up. And so those two things go together. I mean, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, Jonathan, you're going to have to be prepared to work long hours. You have to be able to keep your energy up. And taking care of your body is just a great way to do that.
100% agree. There's a couple guys out there who are starting to be seen as social media gurus for entrepreneurs and stuff. And one of them talks about very adamantly, just for the sake of saving money, he says you can eat crap when you're 20, 25, for 5 years and live in a super cheap living situation, which I agree with the living situation. He's saying, you could just live off of fast food and live in the basement kind of thing and eat Doritos. And I'm thinking to myself, that's going to really diminish your ROI on your efforts because you're going to be tired, lazy, and lethargic from that crappy food. But again, that's my view of that. I don't know what you would say to that.
Yeah, I would say you're right. You can live cheaply. I think you can always live cheaply. You get used to living in what you're living in. And I've lived very cheaply in places in my life, especially when I was 20 and 25. But even then, if you realize that the fuel that you put, the food that you put in, the rest that you put in, that's what fuels your body. That's what you're putting in your gas tank. And I've always sort of figured that if you put really crappy gas in your car will run, but it's not going to run as well or as long.
Right.
If you put second-rate fuel, you get second-rate energy from it. Now, like I said, I've eaten fast food and I get what he says. And from time to time, I still love to eat fast food.
Who doesn't? Yeah.
But you don't do it every day.
Right.
And, if you can eat fast food, if you can eat Doritos, then you can eat a healthy sandwich just as easy as you can eat unhealthy sandwich from drive-through fast food. It's a choice that you make in life. And it's a choice that you make in life that has an impact for many, many, many years after that.
I love that. What is some of your main motivation for continuing to hustle in your career and in your personal life and growth and development? What keeps you getting out of bed in the morning?
It's a great question. And it's one I'm getting to a point in my career that theoretically I should start looking at slowing down. I haven't done that yet. One is because I continue to be excited by the opportunity of what's next. As long as I'm continuing to be excited about that, I do that. I judge how long I stay in my career by this question: are you still relevant? And what I hope is, I don't know that I'll get it right. I hope that I do. But what I hope is that I exit my career when people go, yeah, but he was still relevant.
Yeah.
Whether we've seen business people or athletes, we've all seen professional athletes who stayed a year too long. Yeah, I don't want to be that guy. It's a pride issue for me. I don't want to be that guy that somebody looks at and go, so he should have hung it up a year ago.
Right.
And that's what continues to drive me.
Yeah, totally understand. A lot younger than you, but I can see where you're coming from there.
Everybody talks about passion is important for entrepreneurs. And, I'm not against passion.
Go ahead and share with my audience one of your most influential business books, not one of your own, maybe another one that you would hand to a young entrepreneur who's having some success and getting ready, looking into the future to really multiply his results into 2018. What kind of book would you hand to him?
I'm going to mention two books because the business book that changed my life was written in the early 80s by Tom Peters and Bob Waterman, and it was In Search of Excellence.
Okay.
Even though that book, a lot of people wouldn't necessarily consider that book relevant today, it changed my life because it opened a world to me where people started talking about how do organizations and leaders succeed. That book opened the world of being able to do what I do today. To me, that book is, I always have to mention that as an important book. If I were going to talk to an entrepreneur today, there's a couple of books out there, depending on what kind of business you are and where you are in your business. There's a book called A Team of Teams by General McChrystal that talked about how they organized teams to fight over in the Afghan war. That's a great book. If you're just starting out, I would tell you to look at, it's a book that's been around forever, but it's a book called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, because it really talks about where a lot of entrepreneurs, how they start their business and where they grow. There's another book out there, depending on, there's a lot of entrepreneurs in sort of blue collar world. I'm not sure how many of your folks are out there that like that, but there's a guy named Mark Stoner who wrote a little book called Blue Collar Gold: How to Build a Service Business from the Dirt Up. If you're building a service business, especially in a blue-collar world, I'd check out what Mark Stoner has written. Mark owns a chimney sweep company.
Very nice.
And he's built a multi-million-dollar business in chimney sweeps and chimney restoration and that kind of stuff. So, there's 3 different books depending on where you are in your business.
Great. Well, that's definitely more than one, but I appreciate the 3. So wrapping up the interview, Randy, what is something like the gem of wisdom or business advice that you would give to a young person that is in today's world? Maybe they're feeling discouraged because they're having some trouble finding and connecting with other individuals who are like-minded and they're being proactive. What would words of encouragement, words of guidance that you may share with them while they're still in a place where they're not sure what their life outlook's going to look like?
Yeah, I would tell you that, you're not going to find like-minded people. If your current set of friends and associates are not like-minded with you, you're not going to find them. So find people. I think to find new people, one of the things that you have to think about doing is getting rid of some of your old people that you're hanging out with. If you're hanging out with folks who are still talking about 10 years ago when we won the district championship in baseball.
Yep. I hear it all the time. all the time.
Yeah,
I almost got picked up by the school.
I'm sorry, but you're going to have to shed those folks. I mean, you still be nice to them and talk to them when you go to the class reunion and be nice to them if you see them and that kind of stuff. But don't hang out with those people because they're sucking the energy out of you. They're holding you back. So, I mean, I think to find those new people, one of the very first things I would tell you is who do you need to get out of your life that's holding you back where you are? We only have so much space in our lives. And if people who are sucking the energy out are taking the space up, you don't have the space to put new people in it.
Assuming that you've already cleared clutter, so to speak, in terms of bad relationships, do you have any places you could go or resources you could look into, anything like that you can think of?
Well, if you live in a place where there's a major university, consider going back to school. I'm enrolling in a part-time MBA program and enrolling in some things like that because, they tend to attract people who are at a certain point in your career. Very fortunate. I do some work with the Cox Business Leadership Center and the MBA program at Southern Methodist University. And one of the things that I really see is that, especially in the part-time MBA program, people are coming and they're going to the classes, but one of the most important things that are happening is they're finding like-minded people who are interested in learning, who are interested in growing, and a lot of them want to be entrepreneurs. That's why they're there to get the business side of what they're passionate about. So you might consider, even if you don't finish it, at least you get to meet some folks. But you're going to have to go where those people hang out. If you are in a community that has shared office spaces, consider shared office space with people who are out there starting in startups with business. Rather than hanging out and taking Wi-Fi from Starbucks, go consider investing in a shared office space that will put you with people who you can brainstorm with. Those are a couple of really just sort of quick ideas off the top of my head. But again, if you want to hang out with entrepreneurial people, you have to go figure out where the entrepreneurial people are hanging out.
Wonderful. Appreciate that insight, by the way. What is a way that the audience can get in touch with you, either on social media or your website?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. My website is Pennington Group, PENNINGTONGROUP, all one word, .com. I am on Twitter, LinkedIn, I have a Facebook business page, but Twitter or LinkedIn probably is a good place to find me. If you type in Randy Pennington, I usually am the very first name that comes up on both of those.
All right. Thank you for being on the show today. I appreciate your time and insight. And I know there was a lot of wisdom shared that my audience will get tons of value from. Thank you again.
My pleasure, Jonathan. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Heart Healthy Hustle podcast. If you made it to the end of this episode, I want to say thank you. And also, I want you to ask yourself why. What about this episode really stood out to you? I want to challenge you to take action on that thing. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate your time and consideration to go ahead and leave a helpful review in iTunes. So it really helps the podcast grow and we can impact even more people who need this. Thank you guys for all of your support, and I will see you in the next episode.